Good morning. Headed up to Augusta, Maine. Another legislative action day for ranked choice voting. Taking time off from taking care of guests and working on the house and fixing things, because this is fixing things. Something very big. The way we do elections in Maine, and hopefully inspiring the way to do elections in the United States of America. It's unfortunate we have to do this. The people of the state of Maine have already voted twice to pass ranked choice voting in 2016 and again in 2018 when the legislature tried to prevent the bill from going into action. We had a successful people's veto. I would also note that our successful people's veto has inspired many others for people's veto, but it is an issue that people should take seriously. And if they aren't in support of an issue, they probably should not sign the petitions. Luckily for the people doing the petitions now for the issues that they want to do a people's veto for, which is a unique legislative tool that the citizens have in the state of Maine that not every state has, they're doing it in the summer when the weather's very nice and people are out walking around. Those of us who did it for ranked choice voting, we did it in the winter, in one of the coldest winters we've ever had, walking around with pens freezing, with people who definitely don't want to be stopped in public from going from one warm heated space to another, and we managed to collect over 70,000 signatures. So we were successful in our ranked choice voting veto, and then ranked choice voting was enacted, and it has already had the intended effects. It helped in the gubernatorial primaries to help people show who their true preference was. It helped Governor Janet Mills win the primary. She led in the first round of voting, but by the time all the rounds of voting or rounds of tabulation after the initial vote had been tabulated, she had a much better percentage, showing she was truly and unquestionably the preference of the majority of voters for the Democratic primary. If she'd have won initially, she'd have had a plurality, not a majority, and people in the party could have forever questioned whether she was truly the choice. So it certainly helped unify the Democratic Party. It could do the same for Republicans as well in elections. It is not a partisan issue. It is not a system designed to favor any one candidate or any individual. Ranked choice voting benefits the voters by giving us a way of expressing our preference in a crowded and divided field of candidates, helps us come to a majority, or when a majority is not available because the public is truly divided. Oh, this guy's like using the left turn lane to turn left. Anyway, so ranked choice voting allows for the people to have their preference of the candidate they most desire, and not let split votes and spoilers throw an election to a candidate that's their least favored candidate, which is unfortunately the problem in first past the post voting, the kind of voting system we use now. Ranked choice voting is simply an improvement over the way we vote. It's not a new thing. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a liberal or Democrat or, an extremist measure. It was invented in 1871 right here in New England by a professor who taught at both Harvard and MIT. It was used for the first time in the 1880s. And 1883, I think, was the first time it was used in an election. It's used in the nation of Australia for over 100 years, a form of ranked choice voting, and it has successfully elected both conservatives and people on the right, people on the left, people in the middle. And in fact, in this last election, despite what opponents of ranked choice voting, who tend to be on the Republican side in Maine, unfortunately, since Republicans have voted for it elsewhere, but in the nation of Australia, in this most recent election that took place this summer, the left was favored to win the election. but they didn't achieve a majority, and it turned out that the true preference of the people was indeed the Conservative Party in Australia, which is similar to the Conservative Party here in the United States. And they were able to win the election because with ranked choice voting, it showed that they were indeed the preference among a divided electorate. So one of the important things to take away from that is ranked choice voting is not really just about Democrats or Republicans. Now, what it is anywhere you have multiple candidates and a divided electorate choosing among candidates, and candidates getting elected with less than a majority, there will be an interest in ranked choice voting and other alternative voting systems. For example, there are others. There is approval voting. Approval voting is where you mark all the candidates that are acceptable to you, not just one. It's still one person, one vote. It's a single ballot. They are experimenting it with, it's been around for a while, but it's used in other places. But I've been reading recently that some municipalities are looking into approval voting. The problem I have with approval voting is that it doesn't allow you to indicate who is really your top choice. Because generally, even if you might be okay with some of the other choices, you probably have one or two candidates that are your preferred candidate that you'd like to see in office. So with ranked choice voting, when you vote for your ballot, you can vote your first preference, and then you indicate if that preference wasn't available, or if they had never been in the election, or if they failed to achieve enough votes to stay in the race, who would be your next first choice. Now, we call it first, second, third choice for convenience, but in reality, every vote in a ranked choice voting election is your first choice. It's simply your first choice of the candidates who are remaining in the field of voters. So in a ranked choice voting election, if no one achieves a majority, the candidate with the least number of votes is dropped. Those ballots are retabulated with the next preference that the voter has indicated on the ballot, and then the ballots are retabulated. In this way, ranked choice voting is also called instant runoff voting, because by putting your choices on a single ballot, we are able to conduct the instant runoff election without people needing to go back to the polls a second time, without all the infrastructure and printing and workers and driving back and forth and people getting daycare and people taking time off from work that a two-round or multi-round runoff election would entail. In fact, ranked choice voting is superior to a multi-round runoff election because the same number of voters that voted in the first round will vote the whole election, except for, of course, spoiled ballots. If someone does not list a second preference, for example, and their favorite candidate is eliminated, their ballot will still be tabulated, but it will be a vote for a candidate that was not in contention. It still counts. It's not thrown away like the opponents would charge, but it's the equivalent of if the person's favorite candidate was never in the race to begin with, that they would have chosen simply to stay home and not vote. In this way, they had every opportunity, the voter would have had every opportunity to indicate what candidates they would have preferred of the remaining candidates. So ranked choice voting is not the only alternative voting system. I talked about approval voting a second ago. Another system that has been considered is range voting. Range voting is a system similar to the way we're graded in school, or works on sites where you rate things 4 or 5 stars. Range voting allows you to vote a value to a candidate. So let's say every candidate gets a ranking from 1 to 100. So a voter might rank one candidate 100, another 90, another 50, and another 5. And doesn't like that candidate, but better than the candidate they wouldn't have chosen at all. Range voting then uses a mathematical algorithm to determine what candidate had the overall greatest score. I find it a very interesting system. It would be good for very small elections, but for large elections with millions of voters, it would be very difficult to maintain the legitimacy of such a system. It would seem arcane to most people, and I just don't think of range voting as politically viable for large mass elections with tens of thousands, if not millions of voters. Although, theoretically, if you go to the sites run by the voting nerds, those of us who really pay attention to how elections work, you will see that range voting is one of the systems they very much like because of its theoretical aspects. However, here in Maine, the League of Women Voters looked at all the different voting systems, and they've done this nationwide, and they recommended ranked choice voting as the most viable and the best way of improving our elections to better represent what the voters actually want than any of the other systems. And in fact, an economist won a Nobel Prize. It's called Arrow's Impossibility Theorem, and he did a lot of studies and research to show that there's no such thing as a perfect voting system. All voting systems will have a certain effect on the outcome of an election. So a lot of people would say, well, we should keep what we had because it's just as good as all the other ones. Like, people like tradition, and I understand that. The only one who likes change is a wet baby, and even they cry about it. But I would note that they're happier afterwards and they realize their situation has been improved. And I think the same is true of ranked choice voting. People who have experienced it, who've used it, even those who are opposed to it for reasons because other people told them it was bad, once they use it, it was like, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was. That was actually good. I like to express my preference. And I think the polling I've seen and the research I've seen shows that people are overwhelmingly generally satisfied with how ranked choice voting works. One of the concerns is ranked choice voting is you don't always get a result instantaneously. We've become a culture where people want this instant gratification of knowing the election result right away. Well, I believe that getting the right answer is better than a quick wrong answer. And what ranked choice voting allows for is the opportunity to take a look at what is the true preference of voters, not letting split votes and spoilers determine an election. Now, when people vote for alternative candidates now, what they see is their friends, their neighbors, their associates would be saying to them, well, why are you going to throw your vote away? Or, that's a wasted vote. That's an unfortunate reality. Like, why in a republic run by democratic principles would we tell someone you can't vote for your preferred candidate? You have to pick someone you don't like for things like electability or strategic voting. Next to a truck carrying a big snow machine. Pardon me while I pay a lot more closer attention here. Alright, there we go. Looks like we're getting ready for winter. That is a snowcat. So for ranked choice voting, you can pick the candidate you like, your heart's desire, even if like only 1% of the people support that candidate. But it's important, I believe, for ranked choice voting, and one of the benefits it has is it will help identify candidates that people truly like who might not have a chance in a current election because they would just be discarded. Whereas people have the freedom to vote for the candidate they truly prefer without jeopardizing creating split votes and spoilers. So in ranked choice voting, the term throwing your vote away does not exist. The term strategic voting is completely changed. Your strategic voting is just figuring out the candidates in the order you like them. Bill, I see you're not a fan, but if you want to tell me sometime when I'm not driving why, I'm happy to have an extended conversation with you. But I do notice that most people are fans of ranked choice voting in the state of Maine. In fact, when we voted for it a second time in 2018, the percentage of people voting yes actually increased from the first time we voted. So maybe you should take a closer look at your friends and neighbors and see how they voted and see why they voted and talk to them to understand what it was that was appealing to them about ranked choice voting, which is what I'm doing now as I drive to Augusta to kind of freshen my mind of all the different points that I will discuss with legislators, if given the opportunity this morning. Now, what's important about today is the legislature passed LD 1083, which is an act to use ranked choice voting for presidential primaries and the general election for president. And it was passed by 58% of the Maine State House and 59% of the Maine State Senate. But our government is broken. There's no doubt about it. That's why I'm doing this, because I think ranked choice voting is a fundamental way to change and improve our government, get better candidates, give people the opportunity to vote for who they want, have the winners be actual majority winners. So even if it's a terrible candidate that I hate, if the majority of people can be behind that candidate, I'm all for it. Like, of course I wouldn't want that, but in a democracy where we vote, it's about choosing our leaders, changing our laws in a peaceful transition, that domestic tranquility, that more perfect union that our country is supposed to be about. So with LD 1083, people get the opportunity to use a ranked choice ballot for the presidency, which with over 20 people running for one of the parties, and I want to point out that last time in 2016, there were 15 candidates running in the other party. So ranked choice voting would have given the voters a way of expressing their preference among those crowded fields. This is what LD 1083 would do. Now, it passed the legislature, but like I was saying, government is broken. It doesn't work well. A lot of times it's shenanigans and technicalities. So ranked choice voting, the LD 1083, despite the fact it passed with a strong majority, was shelved or tabled for budget issues and put to the side. It was just legislative shenanigans. And say, oh, we can't afford it. Well, what is the price of a system that doesn't work well? I think that's quite expensive. And what is worth having who's elected be who the voters really want? I think that's a valuable thing. And in fact, we showed at the last election that ranked choice voting does not significantly increase the cost of conducting an election, and it's a lot better than a runoff election in that everyone who votes the first time gets to vote, and there's no added cost of putting on a second round of voting. So ranked choice voting, also called instant runoff voting, is superior to a multi-round runoff. That is one of the arguments people use, like, oh, why don't we use a real runoff election? Why don't we, go back a second time? Well, ranked choice voting has the same or similar results as an instant runoff, or a regular two-round runoff election. But here's the problem. But let me table that for a second, just like LD 1083 was tabled. I'll come back to it. But what happened in the legislature in Augusta is they tabled LD 1083 despite the fact that a majority vote of both houses of the Maine legislature had passed it. And now today, the reason I'm driving to Augusta is there's a special session. The governor has called this special session, and we're hoping a large group of us will be there to talk to legislators, to convince them to pass it so that we can use it in the 2018 presidential election cycle. This may well be the very last chance. This could literally be one of those critical moments in Maine and American history that improves and changes our nation for the better. If I did not truly believe that in all my heart, I would not be here. I've been a supporter of ranked choice voting since the 1990s. I have actively campaigned and discussed it with people. Anyone who pays attention to me knows I see it as an important issue. I know it's not a perfect system. As I pointed out earlier, there is no such thing as a perfect system. Ranked choice voting is simply a better system. It's a better system for conducting an election. It's a better system for representing the will of the voters. It's a better system for helping a divided people come back together again after an election, to have everyone had every opportunity, no matter how extreme their views might have been, to have their voice heard and tabulated so that what they believe in has been measured in the system of democracy to see, are they the majority? Are they close to a majority? Could they, in a future election, modify their positions or put a redoubled effort into getting what they want and the people they want, the policies they want, the laws they want into office? Ranked choice voting allows all groups, no matter how small or large, to see what their actual support is and how soft it is. For example, if a preferred candidate is not a majority candidate, who are those people who like that candidate? Who is their second choice? Because that is not always absolutely clear. We know, for example, that about 1 in 10 Bernie voters went and voted for Trump. So Trump obviously was their second choice, when a lot of people would have taken it for granted that because Bernie was running as a Democrat, that all of his voters would just vote for Hillary. That's not what happened. About 1 in 10 Bernie voters did that. Now, we also know that Obama voters did not prefer Hillary Clinton, many of them, because about 4 million people who voted for Obama stayed home in 2018 and did not vote for Hillary Clinton. Those people may have preferred another Democrat. They may have preferred a Republican that was not chosen in the final analysis. They may have chosen an alternative candidate. We know that they didn't show up to vote for Clinton, but because we don't have ranked choice voting, we don't know what their real preference was. We don't know what they might have chosen. We don't know how those 4 million people may have felt disenfranchised by not having any real choices available to them in the general election. Ranked choice voting will give the voters the candidates they really want to vote for, without worrying about things like electability and without the dominance of the two major parties who make it seem like it's a foregone conclusion to vote for them, even though, for example, here in the state of Maine, the plurality of people are independent. This is one of the reasons ranked choice voting was able to be passed in Maine, because the largest group of voters in Maine are not of the two major parties. They are independent voters. Now, they may lean left or right on certain issues, but they are not enamored enough with the two major parties to be a member or to join. So ranked choice voting gives independents and alternative voters a way of expressing their vote without throwing their vote away or casting a meaningless protest vote or creating a spoiler or split votes. So anyway, let's get back to that thing I said I talked about earlier, because just like the legislature, I hope the issue gets brought up again today to be discussed. Some people like actual multi-round runoff elections. Well, we had one in Maine recently. We had one for the Lewiston mayor race, and a very unsatisfying result happened. The candidate who had the most votes in the first round of voting did not have enough votes to get a majority. So the rules for the Lewiston mayor race is they had a runoff election. Now, the candidate who had the second most votes in the first round won the runoff election. The problem, though, is that the amount of votes that the candidate won with in the second round was dramatically less than the number of votes the candidate who led in the first round had in the first round. Fewer people showed up for the election. The argument was that maybe some people weren't fully understanding the process, or maybe they couldn't make it out again because of work commitments or whatever reasons, or childcare. So even though the candidate who lost had more votes in the first round, the guy won with less votes in the second round than the loser had winning in the first round. That is an unsatisfying result. That is fewer people coming out. That is people being disenfranchised because of the method. In ranked choice voting, because it's done with a single ballot, the winning totals will always be higher. They will always include all of the voters that came out to cast ballots in the first round. Now someone's going to say, well, what about exhausted ballots? Or what if my guy gets dropped out? Well, that happens. The ballots are still counted, though. Those votes are still in the final tally, but they are for candidates that did not pass the threshold, were not the choice of the majority, and did not affect the outcome of the election. No such thing as thrown away votes in a ranked choice voting election. Anyway, so we're headed up to ranked choice voting today to support it, to encourage the legislators to follow through on what they already voted for, what already passed, so that they will take the measure into hand so that Maine voters can get what we asked for at the polls twice, in 2016 and 2018, and let us use ranked choice voting to choose our representatives and our leaders, and help us as a people who are very divided come back together again after an election by making the election as fair and transparent and not affected by spoilers. interestingly enough, since in Maine, Republicans have rallied against ranked choice voting, and here's the reason: many of them, about 20-30% support among Republicans from all the polls I've seen. Here's something interesting, though. Ranked choice voting in Utah and Alaska is supported by the Republican Party. It's been pushed by the Republican Party. Now, why? Because in those states, they noticed that Republican majorities were being split by multiple candidates. In Alaska, Republicans were losing votes to Libertarian candidates and losing elections because of it. And they recognized that conservative and right-wing voters were truly the majority, but the election results were not showing that. So, of course, as I pointed out earlier, any place you find a split vote where a majority is getting split because of multiple candidates and losing to parties or candidates with lesser vote totals, you will see an interest for ranked choice voting. Now, does ranked choice voting change elections? No, it really doesn't. In most elections, ranked choice voting will only strengthen the candidate that had the most votes in the first round. Now, some people say, well, why use it then? That's not important. That would ignore the fact that we want majorities. I mean, every kid learns in school like a democracy is majority rules. And then some people are, we're not a democracy. Well, we are a republic. Yes, it's true, but we're a republic run by democratic principles, and among those democratic principles are the majority wins. It's that simple. So if a candidate in the first round would win with 20% of the vote, you could have 80% of the voters saying, well, he's not the guy I wanted. Our system's broken. It doesn't work. Well, with ranked choice voting, with multiple rounds of voting and candidates getting eliminated through the instant runoff process and voters expressing their preference, that candidate who has maybe 28% in the first round can end up with a majority. And then by the end of the election process, everyone will see, and that is important, the feeling people have after an election, that an election was legitimate, that every candidate had a fair shot, that their voice was heard, that their vote was tallied and counted and respected, and the process was clear and without fraud or shenanigans. That is important. So in a ranked choice voting election, the candidate will have a stronger vote total, and that will show that that candidate who then takes office is truly the choice and the preference of the majority of people, and that has value. That is a legitimizing aspect of a ranked choice voting election. That helps all sides come back together again, win or lose, to recognize that their votes mattered, their votes had every opportunity, but their candidate was not the selected candidate. Now, out in San Francisco and the Bay Area, certain municipalities used ranked choice voting. Now, progressives, they like change. Ranked choice voting has changed, so they were all for it, and the progressives came out strongly. But one of the mistakes they made is they pushed ranked choice voting is progressives are going to get elected if we use ranked choice voting. Well, guess what didn't happen? They did get ranked choice voting, but then progressives still weren't getting elected. Why? Because progressive policies and candidates were still not the preference of the majority of voters. And progressives were upset. They thought that some of them had been sold this bill of goods, like ranked choice voting is going to make it so we get elected. No, ranked choice voting makes it so your votes won't be split. It makes it so that you can coalesce your votes around a certain candidate without being affected by split votes or spoilers. But if you still don't have a majority, you're still not going to get elected. Ranked choice voting only reflects what the majority of voters truly prefer. That's what we're supposed to be about. It's not win at all costs. It's not game the system so we win even if we have to cheat or kick other people out of the election or make it so other people can't get their voices heard or make it so they feel like they have to vote for our big parties because their small parties don't count. No, it should be about representing what the people really want. And that's one of the things ranked choice voting does effectively and better than our current system of voting. That's why I'm driving to Augusta today to talk to legislators, to attempt to encourage them to pass LD 1083, which they already passed earlier in the year, but take it off the table and put it into action so that the voters of Maine can use ranked choice voting and the voters of this nation can see that ranked choice voting is a good, stable system that can help bring not only Mainers, but all Americans back together after our elections so that we see the politics that unify us, focusing on uniting these United States of America, should be our effort. I truly believe this is the most important work of my life to date, supporting and defending our Constitution, which I believe is under threat. I think we can get to that more perfect union. I think that ranked choice voting is a part of that more perfect union, and that is the reason I am supporting and have been supporting ranked choice voting here in Maine, to come up with a better way to choose our leaders so that we can be a more united people once again, and find ways to speak to each other in a way that even if my candidate is not the preferred candidate, that we can have a civil conversation about why another candidate should be our preference. Ranked choice voting has, in places where it's used, and can in this place, improve the tone and tenor of our elections, because if you are a candidate running, you might not be someone's first choice, but you don't want to alienate all the other candidates' supporters, because alright. So we're getting close to Augusta. We're passing Bodenham now. Love driving in Maine. I love our beautiful state. I like our trees. Lord knows the world needs more trees, especially with Siberia and the Amazon burning down. So if you truly want to save the world, plant trees and support ranked choice voting. It's a fundamental change that can help improve the way we choose our politicians and our leaders and our representatives. I'm not doing it because I support any particular ideology. I'm a traditional swing voter. I have been a Olympia Snow and Bill Cohen voter, and George Mitchell, Democrat and Republicans in Maine. I like Jock McKernan. I would have voted for John McCain the first time around. He kind of lost me the second time around with his running mate. I liked Governor Mitt Romney of Massachusetts. Candidate Mitt Romney unfortunately ran so far to the right I could no longer support him, and then kind of tried to do the nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing, like, oh, I'm really a moderate. But that is the unfortunate reality of our politics, where politicians are dishonest to us. Oh my God, shocked, the politician dishonest. No, but the system requires them to run to the extremes of their party for the primary and then back to the center for the election, or energize an activist base abusing electoral politics to get elected with a minority of the votes, which is just wrong. Majority rules. The reason majority should win in a democratic system is so that after the election is over, the people can come back together. When a small group wins, a large majority can become alienated, and if it continues to happen, that will inevitably lead to civil strife and unrest, and potentially violence if it continues. As we've seen again and again and again in human history, when a minority group, and I don't mean that in a racial sense, I mean that as a minority of support, or a small oligarchy, an elite aristocracy, when they rule a nation over the will of a majority, the inevitable and eventual result will be civil strife, unrest, and violence, and potentially revolution of the violent variety, which would truly benefit none of us. America is a great nation. We're still doing well. It doesn't need to be great again. That was an insult to even imply it. We're a nation that needs to work on things. We have a lot of things that we've done wrong, without a doubt. But one of the things about America is that we are a self-correcting nation, and we are committed to being that more perfect union. That is what I believe is the essence of supporting our Constitution, is to continue securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, doing it in a way that continues to support the general welfare and domestic tranquility, and not dividing and inflaming the population and alienating people and excluding people and having different sets of rights for people. And I believe ranked choice voting is one thing that can help us as a nation come back together, because it will help us vote for leaders and policies and preference, which is our preference, what we truly want, without being affected by split votes or divisiveness. I believe in focusing on the united in the United States of America and the uniting of the United States of America. And that doesn't mean getting rid of everyone I don't like or don't approve of. It means learning to work together and have a system that finds a way that very different, very diverse people can live together peacefully in a way that creates that more perfect union, that supports our goals for the common defense and, justice for all. I believe in a nation of we the people, all the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. And that comes from Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address. Let's talk about Lincoln for a second. A guy named William Seward was from New York, and he bought Alaska. And Trump is trying to imitate that by buying Greenland, even though it's not for sale. And that was Seward. They called it Seward's Folly at the time. But yeah, we bought Alaska. It's a great thing. Glad that Alaska's in the Union. Great state, a lot of resources, wonderful natural beauty, important for the environment. So Seward, by the way, won the first round of voting at the Republican convention back in when Lincoln was running. Lincoln, by the way, did not win until the third round of voting. Lincoln was not the choice in the first round. He did not have the majority of votes. In fact, nobody had the majority. Lincoln was not the choice in the second round. It wasn't until the third round of voting that Republicans back in the 1860s chose Abraham Lincoln, the father of the Republican Party, who the Republicans like to say, the party of Lincoln. He was chosen in a runoff voting situation, which is exactly what ranked choice voting is. Ranked choice voting is a way of conducting a runoff election with a single ballot. So if we had plurality rules, like a lot of people are saying who are opposed to ranked choice voting, like, well, plurality is good enough. Well, I find it fascinating and ironic that Republicans now in Maine, because they perceive ranked choice voting as somehow only because they didn't like LePage. It's not, by the way. But they think ranked choice voting is like, oh, we want pluralities and we don't want this majority thing. Like, what? That's what democracy running by democratic principles is all about. So Lincoln didn't win till the third round, and then they had a special fourth round where it solidified Lincoln's lead. So literally without ranked choice voting, literally without majority voting, we wouldn't have had Lincoln. So I think Republicans, more than anyone, should be supporting ranked choice voting. And you know what? In other places, like I pointed out, Utah and Alaska, ranked choice voting is being supported by Republicans. Here in Maine, because people tend to look with a very myopic lens, they're looking at this one election, and they saw that a Democrat was advantaged in this one election because ranked choice voting showed that the majority of people really did support the Democrat. And Republicans like, we would have won if all the votes didn't really matter. If only our votes counted, we would have won. Well, unfortunately, in my view, sadly, many people these days think winning is the most important thing. I think respecting the country, respecting and honoring and making sacred our systems of coming to agreement and creating that more perfect union and securing those blessings of liberty are truly the most important. Country should be more important than party. I see ranked choice voting as a way of getting us back to those ideals, those values, and those benefits and those advantages for us, because we truly want to be a representative nation. We truly want to be we the people. And those people who don't, those are the people that are a threat to our system. Those are the people that want an oligarchy or a fascist regime that only truly is supported by a minority of people, or whoever can spend the most money for votes. We have some other things to work on. Ranked choice voting, in my opinion, is fundamental, but we certainly need to work on the way we finance our elections. We certainly need to take the legalized bribery out of politics. We certainly need to address gerrymandering and have our districts created in ways that don't specifically advantage the party in power to maintain that party in power. We don't need districts being cracked and packed and stacked the way gerrymandering works. So yes, there are things we could do. We certainly need more access to the polls. We need a physical record of election. There are many other changes we can make that improve our democratic systems for all parties. I believe ranked choice voting is fundamental. That's why I choose to spend the majority of my effort supporting this one issue. I'll talk about anything online, but the thing I'll drive out for or get people to sign petitions for in freezing cold winter has been ranked choice voting. And once we've finally succeeded in this issue, maybe I'll move on to something else. But the fact of the matter is we've had 2 votes in the state of Maine where the people voted for ranked choice voting with an increased voting total the second time. We've had the legislature vote for ranked choice voting now with 58 and 59% in the Maine House and Senate. And still, because of the shenanigans of government and what doesn't work in our system, I'm sitting here driving to Augusta with hopefully a large group of other people who see this as a critical, fundamental issue to support and defend our Constitution, to improve our system of governance for the state of Maine, and inspire, hopefully, the rest of the country to consider using better methods to vote that can help bring us back together again. Again, I want to focus on the uniting and the united in the United States of America. I firmly believe that ranked choice voting is a way to help support that. Not a guarantee. People can still vote for terrible people even with ranked choice voting. The majority might want something that's truly not in the benefit of the country, but at least we will all head down that path knowing that that is what we the people decided, and we the people will do our best to make the best of it. And I also believe that if it chooses to be wrong, we the people will change our minds and correct that injustice, just like we have several times in our history, just like we continue to do so. And hopefully we will have our self-correcting government again in 2020. Like in 2018, a lot of people came out and said, hey, what happened in 2016 isn't what we want. We want a system that supports a majority. And if the other side can convince enough people that they're right, great. Let's go that way. Let's just make sure that's what the majority wants. Let's make sure that's what's supported. Because at the end of the day, our system of government was created so that we have a method of choosing our leaders and settling our differences peacefully through the ballot and not with bullets. And as a 2-tour combat veteran in a country that didn't work very well, has all kinds of problems, and still suffers from extreme violence, I'm telling you that is not the way we want to go. I see ranked choice voting as a way of ensuring that domestic tranquility and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. I truly believe ranked choice voting is part of that more perfect union. And that's why I am going to pass through the Gardner Tolls on the way to Augusta from Scarborough, about an hour and 15-minute drive from my house today, when I have tons of guests in my house and tons of projects waiting for me at home, because sometimes some things are more important than our individual lives, and we can do something better together. And I'm hoping that's what will happen today. I'm actually not very optimistic. I think there can be a lot of shenanigans. They might table it, and we might not get to use ranked choice voting. We might not get to model it for the nation, and Maine will not have a leadership role in this process, which we could have, which we are trying to have, and that would be a shame. But the pessimist in me says it's probably not going to happen. But then, if it does happen, I get to be pleasantly surprised at the end, so that would be nice. I've put a lot of effort, personal effort. Thousands of volunteers have put in a lot of effort. All right. Passing through the Gardner Tolls. A lot of us stood out in the freezing cold and rain to do the people's veto with ranked choice voting, and we were successful in the depth of one of the coldest winters in Maine history. And we got it done. And we did it not just for ourselves, we did it for our state and our country. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because they're a liar if they're saying it. Those of us who voted for ranked choice voting truly want a better way to pick our candidates. Yes, I'm not going to say that there aren't some people who think it's going to benefit their party or candidate, but I'm here to tell you it's not how it works. I talked earlier about how progressives were selling the argument that more progressives will get elected with ranked choice voting in California and San Francisco, and then they were mad when it didn't happen. Well, that's because you still need the majority. ranked choice voting will require you to have that large base of support to convince the most voters that you're right. And progressives, for all the good of their position, I like some of what they say. I'm not a progressive. I do have some progressive things that I like, but I also have some conservative things I like, depending on the issue. But ranked choice voting is going to advantage the voters by giving them better choices, a better way of choosing, a better way of coming together, a better way of avoiding split votes and spoilers determining the outcome of elections, an election system that is harder to commit fraud with, an election system that is harder to use shenanigans and supporting opposing candidates to try to split the vote of your opposition to get elected. Because in ranked choice voting, if a party supports multiple opposition candidates in a bid to split the other side's vote, it might have the reverse effect of bringing out more voters who then will list those opposing candidates as a preference. It literally takes a whole way of committing election shenanigans off the table. Not completely. They can still try it. But as I pointed out, it's a very dangerous strategy. So when Republicans spent money to support Ralph Nader in the hopes to draw away votes, and when Democrats supported Ross Perot because he was perceived as being able to split Republican votes, that's shenanigans. That is not the way elections should run. That is monkeying with the tools of elections. Ranked choice voting makes that a lot less likely and a very dangerous strategy for people to try to manipulate, because it can have the opposite effect of electing your opposition. Now, you still need paper ballots. You still need a physical record. We want to avoid shenanigans with tampering with electronic election system. It's a very real concern. Ranked choice voting is not a panacea. It doesn't affect that. Ranked choice voting has nothing to do with the Electoral College. Ranked choice voting has nothing to do with campaign financing. All those are completely separate issues, but ranked choice voting can have a beneficial effect. I believe it's a foundational issue that will help us develop a better system for electing our leaders. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. I don't like wasting my time. I don't do things out of spite. I don't even do things in an overtly partisan way. I don't even think the parties are necessarily holding the right answer. I hope maybe something better comes along and is able to capture the imagination and inspire the American people to choose something even better than both of the major parties. I don't think that's the only answer that's out there. I don't know what that perfect answer would be, but I know that if it comes out there and it is inspiring and convincing, the majority of voters will want to choose it, and ranked choice voting is a system that'll let that happen, especially if the major parties are no longer offering what the majority of voters really want. Ranked choice voting will also help the large parties improve their appeal to the voters, because they will be required not to just assume, well, they have to vote for one of us, we don't have to worry about those other ones. Well, in ranked choice voting, if neither party of the major parties is what the voters desire, it's true, an independent or an alternative candidate could get elected. That's not a bad thing if that's what the majority of people want. And if the majority of people want something other than what the parties are offering, that is an indicator to the parties that they need to change or adapt or evolve with the situation in the country. Times change. People change. What people find important is different. When I was a kid, the big fear was nuclear war, and thank goodness it's not the big fear anymore, but that dominated discussions in elections and SALT talks and strategic arm reduction talks. Still very important, still needs to be paid attention to, but it's not the everyday talk of politics. It's not the daily fear. We have other issues. We're concerned with violence in America. We're concerned with our economy. We're concerned with terrorism, which at least is a less existential threat than nuclear war, unless terrorists get nuclear weapons. They talk about that. So there's still lots of big issues that we need to address. Ranked choice voting doesn't control any of that. It just gives us a method of picking our representatives who will hopefully make good and wise decisions about the future of this country. All right, I'm getting off the highway in Augusta. Going to meet the group at the State Capitol building. Hope everyone has a great day. I hope by the end of the day, Maine has a better way of picking candidates for the presidential primaries and elections using ranked choice voting. And that is my mission. Do my best to support and defend the Constitution of this country and making a more perfect union and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Have a great day. Bye-bye.